Hey, welcome everybody here. This is Jason, and I'm here with my great friend, good friend, Mike Bradley, mentor, kind of a spiritual father in my life, someone I love deeply, and it's so great to have you here, Mike. Can you share just a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
You're with the denomination affiliation that we're with, LCMC. Love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here, first of all,
Yeah.
in Clear Lake, and just to hang out with you again, Jace. I'm the director for Lutheran Congregations in Mission for Christ.
Which a lot of people are like, what's that?
Exactly. First of all, Lutherans, we always have to have an acronym. So LCMC. It's a bunch of Lutherans who want to be in mission for Christ. And that's certainly true of Zion Lutheran here in Clear Lake. That's what you all are all about. Yeah.
Now they're a little bit different, and for those who are watching, maybe part of our church community, LCMC is not like a synod.
Correct.
It's an affiliation. Can you say a little bit more about that? And then we're going to get into the meat, but people don't know who you are. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's wonderful to have that.
Well, LCMC was birthed 21 years ago, and we wanted to have an association
Okay.
of congregations, not a denomination. It's not just a play on words. We wanted the authority and responsibility for mission to stay in the local congregation,
Okay.
not have a heavy hierarchy at some national office telling congregations who they had to be, what they had to do.
Yeah. And that's so a good friend of ours, Per Nilsson.
Yeah.
He once described it as he said, if you have Robert's Book of Order or rules or whatever it
Yeah.
is for meetings, LCMC is Bob's book of getting her done.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. Yeah, that's about right.
So I've known you now for, geez, almost 15 years. Is
I
that
know, something
geez,
like that.
2008, I think, is when we first met when I was
Yeah.
teaching pastor at another church.
Yeah.
Wow. So part of what we do in this podcast is we talk about what we're learning in the Sunday, this sermon series right now. We're in
Okay.
this series on 40 Days of Purpose. And yesterday, which we filmed this on Mondays, so yesterday we preached and we talked about that you were created for family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, as long as I've known you, you've had a mission that's always been at the central part of who you are. Way before LCMC, I think I met you when you were
Yeah.
you were the president of MI Masters Institute.
Yeah.
And it's that safe place for a dangerous kind. In fact, I think the first time I ever heard you preached on the safe place for a dangerous kind. Say a little bit more about what that is, kind of your heart behind the safe place for a dangerous
Sure.
kind. And then I'd love to talk about how that connects with what does it mean to be created for part of the church family? Because I think those things are so intimately connected.
Yeah. Well, before being at the Masters Institute, the seminary where you and I met, I was a pastor in a local congregation. And for the first 12 years of this particular congregation, it was just an amazing time. God was doing some amazing things.
Yeah.
I was serving under an amazing pastor, and he retired. And somebody new came along, and out of his own lack of health and wholeness, he started preaching and teaching things that were just dividing the body of Christ. We're setting people up against each other, things that weren't scriptural. And it created a place that was unsafe.
Wow.
The congregation grew from 2,500 people to 400 in 3 years.
2,500 to 400 in 3 years.
Yeah, so and this was in the Black Hills region of South Dakota. So we aided church growth in the Black Hills because all of our members were going to
Yeah.
other churches. And I remember telling my wife, it's just not safe here. And that's when I began to reflect on, and God began to speak to me about what might it mean for Christians to be a safe place, because Christians can be unsafe.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think part of what happens, and you've been, and this is part of the reason why I think our relationship, you've always been a pretty pivotal part of my relationship in the last 15 years
oh, thanks.
and my spiritual development. And I think so often in churches, we don't think about that the goal of becoming a Christian is becoming whole,
Yeah,
wholly whole,
right.
right? And that only happens in the context of creating a church family. But that means just
Correct.
like a regular family, it has its own brokenness.
Yes.
What do you think what is the fear within Christians, and particularly within the church family context, the community of Christ? Why do you think we push back so much on emotional health, relational health? Why is that such a fearful topic for so many in the church?
Well, it could be for a number of reasons, but one of the primary reasons I've seen is the fear is rooted in the fact that I don't have anybody I feel like I can be vulnerable with,
Oh, yeah.
I can be transparent with, and trust them. Because that's a great gift
Yeah.
when you make yourself vulnerable to somebody. And I need to be able to trust them that they're going to keep it confidential unless it's a life-threatening situation. As somebody who can just be there to listen, to love, to pray. And if I'm afraid that you might use what I share with you against me, I will
Yeah.
keep it hidden.
Oh, and I think that is such a, in fact, when you and I first started meeting, you actually helped kind of coach me and walk me through some seasons of my own growth. As much as I can point it to other people, I think there was a side of me that ability to be vulnerable, to share in a safe place, a safe
Sure.
space. I think what happens within family is because we bring our baggage with us, right?
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
And Jesus knows that. I mean, when we look at the Bible from the very first pages, the only whole person throughout the entire scripture is Jesus. Like
Correct.
even our heroes of the faith
Yep.
are all messed up, broken people.
Exactly.
And I think we talked about this yesterday, is that this idea of being created for family is that sometimes if our family of origin is messed up, well, of course we bring that into the spiritual family.
Right.
How do we create that environment then that we can foster growth within ourselves? And I think that vulnerability is such an interesting word. Brene Brown, which everybody's familiar with Brene Brown.
Love Brene Brown. Yeah.
How do we foster vulnerability in a community context in which you can actually have real conversations, but also not enable unhealthiness? Because I think that's one of the things that you did so well for me early on, is that you allowed me to be vulnerable, but you didn't enable me to stay broken. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. And in one sense, one of the first things I think is that it starts with the leaders.
Yeah.
So it might be the leaders in a home.
Okay.
So it's going to start with mom and dad or that single parent. In the church, it's going to start with the lead pastor and with the leadership team. There seems to be some dynamic that what happens with that leadership team, what happens with mom and dad, then filters down on the rest of the family.
Oh, yeah.
So it starts with that leadership team, that mom and dad, just simply telling the Lord, I do want to experience your work. It's God's work. It's
Yeah.
not ours. Of becoming more healthy, becoming more whole. Knowing that this side of heaven, as you just said, this side of heaven, nobody's going to be 100% safe all the time. I'm going to blow it. I'm going to say things to you that I shouldn't have said. I'm not going to say things I should have.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do things I should have. That Romans 7 kind of thing. But even in that, God can be at work, because I can say, hey, Jason, when I spoke to you like that the other day, that was wrong.
Yeah.
Period. Not comma, but period. Please forgive me. And there's the opportunity for our relationship to heal and perhaps even be stronger going on. So God even uses our failures
Yeah.
to grow us and be in that safe place.
My favorite quote right now, because I when I went into school, because I went to college or university, whatever
Yeah.
you want to call it, in my 30s. So I did junior college, and that's part of my story and testimony. But I went and got my bachelor's and my master's, and it wasn't until my first day of class, and I remember writing, because we had to pre-write the paper because it was an adult education class. So I wasn't in with a bunch of 18-year-olds. Everybody in there was 28 to 50 something, right? And I remember writing that first paper, and I was terrified. What if I fail?
Sure.
And for years, I made excuses that the reason why I didn't go to school, I wasn't a big believer in college in my 20s, is because that's the man's institution, and churches, you don't need those things. Until I actually decided to do it, and then I wrote that first paper, and I realized my greatest fear was failure. And my favorite quote right now, there's a guy named Ed Milet, he's a motivational guy.
Okay.
And I don't remember who he was interviewing. He was a baseball player. But he said, all failure is feedback. And if you can look at failure as feedback, it doesn't have to define you as a person, because we're all going to fail. We're all going to have those moments. And when you can create a safe atmosphere, a family atmosphere in which people have the freedom to fail,
Oh, it's
and
huge.
it doesn't define their work, it doesn't, and even that's, and okay, I'm going to be a little, I want to be careful here, even morally fail.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what leads. I mean, okay, so you and I both were in the Twin Cities, and there was a very well-known pastor in a very large church in the Twin Cities in 2000. I want to say 3, 4, somewhere around there, and huge church.
Yeah.
And he went on a mission trip, came back, and his elders met him at the airport and informed him that he had been caught in an affair, and that
yeah.
he was now fired, and it was all over. I remember the Star Tribune. It was every Star Tribune. Is that Minnesota paper? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
it was like all over the paper. This very well known pastor, and they interviewed him. Actually, they interviewed one of the elder board members and said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, his marriage was falling apart. He didn't know who to tell, and so he kept it secret. And then he was
Yeah.
meeting with another woman to counsel her, and eventually it fell into an affair." And it all traced back to is he didn't feel safe to
Exactly.
talk about. Now, I'm not saying that, like, I do believe that there are some sins that either permanently disqualify you from ministry or temporarily disqualify you until you get healing and wholeness,
Right.
right? And so I'm not, that's why I said I want to be careful. Like, we have to hold standards on pastors.
Yeah.
But I think let's take ministry as an example. You have a pastor whose marriage is struggling, and if he doesn't feel he has a place that he can be vulnerable to share that, it leads to secrecy.
Exactly.
And so it's the wisdom, there are things I don't talk to my kids about
Yeah.
because I love my kids and they don't need to know nor do they want to know.
Yeah.
And there are things as a pastor I don't share with my church, but I do have people in my life that I am vulnerable with.
Which is huge. A recent Barna poll shows that 70% of pastors and lay leaders in a church do not believe they have someone they can trust
Yeah.
to be a confidant or a mentor. And when you don't have that, you just keep it hidden and it grows and then eventually has some really unhelpful and harmful consequences.
And I think that comes back that safe family environment. Not everybody grew up in safe family environments.
Correct.
And I think we have to acknowledge that.
Yep.
And whatever you don't fix, it follows.
Yeah.
Right. And I even think about, even within the church context, mental health stuff within the church is such a fearful conversation. At least it
Yes.
was for years. I think it's getting better.
Better.
I think we're having more conversations, but
Yeah.
I remember my wife and this is her public story, so I'm not sharing
Sure.
anything out of school here. She suffered for depression for many years.
Yeah.
And a pastor once told us, well, you need to tithe more.
Oh,
And then another pastor, before we got married, I had somebody counsel me that said it was a sin for me to marry her if she was on medication.
oh,
This was I wouldn't call him a mentor. He was a pastor, and I
Yeah.
went to him for pastoral advice. And I've met so many people that the reason why we bring our brokenness, one, I think we expect Jesus to fix everything, and yet that's not how Jesus works.
correct.
But if we're created for family, that means that we're also created, and I want to say this the right way, we're created with the understanding that we're all a little bit broken. We're all, the cheese is a little bit off the cracker of all of it.
That's exactly how Jesus would have said it. But
It would have been an Aramaic, but yeah.
yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, we're sitting here today. You and I are sitting here as broken brothers in Christ, and thank goodness we have God's healing combination of grace and truth.
Oh yeah.
So that's his healing combination. One thought that came to mind as you were just talking, also the phrase I use is, what we don't allow God to transform, we will transmit.
Oh wow.
And my wife, Debbie, again, her public testimony that she shares often also is similar to Lisa's. And Debbie was told that if she were to look for medication for her chronic depression, she would be living in sin.
Yeah.
And finally, a brother in Christ came along, somebody who we respected and who became my mentor, gave her permission. And just said that, no, that's not sin at all. That's one avenue of God's healing.
That's right. Yeah.
She was able to find the right medication, the right dose, and so forth, and just opened up a whole new joy in life.
So now we have this. Oh, okay. So let's say go back to the family understanding, right? For those of us who come from maybe unhealthy families or broken families, all families have brokenness. Some families are actually broken.
Correct. Yeah.
The church is supposed to be the model or the example
Yeah.
of what a family could be.
Right.
And
Okay.
we're never going to have perfection, right? This side of
Correct.
heaven.
Yeah.
And God knows that. And it seems like if that's the case, then the church really should take seriously this understanding of emotional wholeness,
Yes. Yeah.
that we should be embracing things like therapy. You and I have talked about it, and I've been very upfront. I did a trauma therapy called EMDR about 4 years ago.
Excellent therapy.
Changed my life.
Yeah.
Absolutely changed my life. It helped me work through some stories that had been following me for decades.
Okay.
That I didn't even realize, like, I didn't know how much they controlled me until something bumped up against that story and all of a sudden I reacted, right?
Right.
Um, in the work that you're doing, and this is a part of what made me want to have you on here, is I was thinking about our conversation at dinner on Saturday night.
Yeah.
And the direction of what you want to see LCMC become and creating healthy leaders. And
Yeah.
because as you said, if mom and dad are in a good place, then the church feels more secure. But if mom and dad are in a good place, then the church feels very insecure.
Right.
How do we create, what can we do now practically
Yeah.
to start fostering environments to help the church family become a healthier model or a healthier version of what a family should look like?
Well, a couple of things I'd like to do with LCMC. So we're an international association, churches here in 15 countries. So with the association as a whole, I'd like to see us adopt two core values. I think one thing that has to happen is you need to identify what are going to be our values. You do actually have to write them out, but you don't want to leave them on the paper or on the website. You actually want to enact them.
Okay.
And so one is what we call leader care. How can we help leaders experience God's work of growing us up to be emotionally, relationally, and spiritually healthier and more whole?
Okay.
What are the instruments he can use to do that? We want to identify those. We want to try to help make those accessible to our leaders. And then the second core value would be being a safe place. How can we develop an atmosphere in LCMC that's safe for leaders to seek that health and wholeness, knowing that we will not be 100% perfect in that.
Yeah.
But we're going to set that as our target.
So in that, one of the illustrations that we've used over the last several weeks is this understanding of a ladder. We actually got it from the story of Jacob's ladder.
Okay, right?
Here's Jacob, who's just stolen the blessing from his brother by conning his father out of getting the blessing.
Right.
He comes to Bethel, the Lord shows him this ladder, and even though I think it's implied in the text, it doesn't certainly say it, is the top of Jacob's ladder was Jacob.
Yeah.
And God is saying, no, I'm at the top of the ladder.
Right. Right.
I'm the king of heaven. You might think you're the king of earth, but I'm the king of all this, and my will is being done.
Yeah.
What we've talked about is what's at the top of your ladder.
Yeah.
And in family, I think sometimes also what happens in church, and this is something I've been convicted of recently, our language in family often focuses on married people
Okay.
and
Yeah.
at the neglect of single people
Correct.
or people with children. And what about people who don't have children or people who've lost children? And I've started realizing that even my own language actually fosters an unsafe place at times.
It can, right.
It's not even meaning to. It's certainly not intentional, but
Correct.
so much of the church is focused on marriage because and that's a majority of people that the church associates
Yeah.
with the church are married people with kids or grandkids.
Right.
And yet we follow a single rabbi who was God become flesh, who died on a cross. I had one of my professors when I was in school said it's a strong possibility that the Apostle Paul was divorced, that he would most likely as a Pharisee would have been married. And it's quite possible that his wife left him when he
Right.
followed Jesus. And, Paul's strong language to the single people and saying, hey, you need to be careful. It's better not to be married so that you can do the will of God. But if you need to be married, right?
Right. Right.
And how do we create a safe environment, recognizing that there are different people, different life situations? And do you get where I'm saying? I mean, because I think what happens, we can focus on one group of people at the neglect of the other, or assume that they're going to make the transition themselves, or they're going to make the connection. How do we do that, or do you have thoughts on that?
Well, you've already alluded to one of the main things, especially when I was in the parish. For instance, we have Mother's Day coming up.
Yeah.
And we want to celebrate mothers. But how many women never had the opportunity to be a mom?
Yeah.
Or they are a mom, but their child died and aren't there. So I just tried to look at Mother's Day, Father's Day, things like that, and just think through what kind of language do I want to use today that is certainly going to honor moms. I don't want to ignore moms, but can be sensitive to women who didn't have that opportunity. So I do think one of the things we can begin to look at talk with each other about, create a safe place to have a dialogue about what kind of language are we using.
Yeah. Well, because then I think what that does is that follows, if people have bad experiences with family or they feel like they don't connect, they don't feel like they can be a part of that family.
Correct. Yeah.
And I wonder how often there are people who they'll come into the church wanting, exploring faith, and they feel like either one, the language of the church doesn't include them.
Yes. Yeah.
And I want to be careful of inclusivism because I think that's led to some really,
Sure.
really bad rabbit trails within our culture and it leads to a lot of division if we're not careful. But we had a Jesus who is inclusively exclusive.
Yeah.
Like he was very clear, like the only way to heaven is through me. That's pretty exclusive.
Pretty exclusive.
That's pretty exclusive. He had a certain ethic that he promoted around sexuality, around
Yes.
relational ethics, financial ethics. I mean, he was very exclusive, but he was inclusive in that everybody, even the most religious of people, even his enemies, were welcome to the table if they were willing to.
Yeah.
If they were willing to acknowledge their brokenness.
Yep.
And that's, I think that's so hard for us as a church today because we want people to fit within a specific model. And if they don't, our natural reaction is to push them out.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And that doesn't create safety and it certainly doesn't create family.
Right.
Last thing, we've got a few more minutes left here. I think the other thing that happens within families is that sometimes our families are not always very good at boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes churches lack boundaries.
Very much so.
Yeah. And I think that part of being created for family does not mean that boundaries no longer exist in the church. Cults set up boundaries to protect the family.
Right.
What are some of the roles or how do you see boundaries playing a part of creating that safe family community?
Yeah, one of the things, and we don't have time, of course, to go into it all today, but you'd have to unpack what does it mean to be a safe place?
Yeah.
And how are we using the word safe? So a safe place, for instance, will not always feel safe.
Say more about that.
So if the operative word is feel, F-E-E-L, if I'm setting healthy boundaries for my kids, for instance, they're not always going to feel like dad's being a good dad.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm actually protecting them and setting up those boundaries. Hey, don't put your hand on top of the stove. Hey, don't run out in the street. We still need to, if we truly want to be a safe place with one another, be willing to identify and set healthy boundaries with each other, be willing to have the hard conversation sometimes that we need to have. But as Christians, too often, we just want to be nice.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being nice unless that's all we are.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so it's really important to set healthy boundaries. Again, grace and truth are God's healing combination. I can set healthy boundaries with you, you with me, in a grace-filled, loving way.
Yeah. You know, I one of the things that we're really striving to be as a church, I think we set boundaries as a church often around the wrong people or the wrong things.
We can, yeah.
And I've seen that a lot in my own life, and I've seen myself guilty of this, where the boundaries we put up are around certain behaviors,
Yes.
and therefore we isolate people. So
Oh, yeah.
if you're doing this, and well, I'll use the scarlet letter in the 80s and 90s when I grew up was divorce.
Okay, right.
And I think about how many divorced people walked away from the church because divorce was the ultimate sin.
Yeah.
In the 90s, which was the purity, love, waits movement.
Right.
It was sex before marriage. And if you had sex before marriage, you
Yeah.
were damaged goods. And now all of a sudden we've created a boundary and we've told people, if you don't fit a specific look or there are certain sins we put boundaries around. Jesus didn't really put boundaries around sinners as much as he did sinful behavior.
Correct.
And I think what's happening now, we've swung too far, where we have some churches that every sin is okay because we want people to feel loved and
Right.
welcomed. Jesus always called out sin, but every sinner was welcome to the table. Every sinner found a safe place within Jesus. Our values, belong, believe, become. There's some controversy right now because there are some pastors who are saying you cannot belong to the church if you're not a Christian. And I would actually argue, no, anybody can belong to a church. Now,
Correct.
becoming a member of the church, belonging to the body of Christ is different because the church is just a gathering of people.
Right.
And we have to, we're striving. I don't think we always do it perfectly, but we strive to be a place where people can come in their brokenness. They can come, there's no sin that's going to exclude somebody from being a part of our congregation. Now, it might exclude them from leadership, because that's a healthy boundary,
Sure, right?
but their ability to feel welcome and connected and loved. So last final thought
Yeah.
before we go. When you think about the people in your life who are family for you,
Yeah.
what makes them safe for you? And you talked a little bit about vulnerability, and you don't have to name names. If you want to, you can. But are there, you've shared with me, there are people in your life that
Yeah.
are like your brothers. They are family for you.
Oh, they are.
That's spiritual family. Share, if you want to, share a little bit about them and what makes that relationship so important and special to you.
Yeah. So for all of us, you don't need a lot of people like this, but you need 2, 3, 3 to 5, something like that. I'm blessed. I have multiple. My wife, Deb, first of all, is next to Jesus. She's about as safe as you get. And then I do have a group of about 3 to 5 guys who are my safe place people. One of the aspects is they do allow me to be vulnerable and transparent. I mean, they know things about me that nobody else needs to know. And they help me process those things. They create an environment where I know they delight in me. They might not delight in what I'm struggling with, but they delight in me. And they always do. And another thing that makes them safe for me is they're just guys. They just know how to live life and love life. And because of that, I don't have to put on some kind of mask, religious mask when I'm in their presence.
Yeah, a good friend of our family, of my wife and I's, she said, they're particularly talking about our church. She says she feels like she can be the same person.
Yeah.
Her two lives came together in one. And again, I think because we were created for family, that family is messy.
Yes.
And I actually think there's beauty in the mess. Like if everybody was uniform and perfect, like that's a uniform. Go to a boarding school, right?
Yeah.
Everything's in a uniform. The messiness of church is part of what I think makes it so beautiful, but it can make it unsafe.
Yeah.
And I think the striving for us is we should strive to create an environment. If I'm understanding and hearing you correctly, and your book is, if you haven't gotten his book, you should get it. It's a good book. We should strive to create safe environments, a safe place for the dangerous kind.
Yeah.
And maybe next time we'll have you back, we'll talk about what the dangerous kind are, because that's a whole different conversation.
That's a whole different one. Yeah.
Mike, brother, I love you.
Love you too.
I'm so grateful for you. And it was wonderful to get to worship with you yesterday. And you're actually going down to do a leader care retreat.
Yeah, Riverside Bible Camp. I leave right after our conversations.
Awesome. Well, hey, brother, thank you so much for being here. I love you, and I miss your face. I don't get to see you as often as I'd like, but it's nice to hear your voice.
Love you too, and look forward to coming back to Clear Lake.
All right. Hey, thanks for watching.